Hello and welcome to Single Payer Radio. I'm Paul Hoppy, broadcasting from the Habron Building in Louisville on the WFMP 106.5 Forward Radio Community Network, where news, information, and entertainment is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The views and opinions expressed on our show are those of the speakers and not the station. Single Payer Radio is a project of Kentuckians for Single Payer Health Care in conjunction with Physicians for a National Health Program through its Kentucky chapter. We produce this program because we believe healthcare is a human right. We advocate for a national, not-for-profit, publicly funded, single-payer healthcare system, also known as Enhanced Medicare for All, covering dental, vision, hearing, prescriptions, mental health, and long-term care, covering everyone starting at birth. Catch our programs at 2 p.m. Monday, 7 a.m. Tuesday, and 11 a.m. on Wednesday. We also stream our show on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and others, so you can listen anytime. And remember, this is an all-volunteer radio station and relies on your ideas and donations to keep us on the air. With rent and other expenses, it costs us $42 a day to operate the station. Our only revenue is the grassroots donations that you guys send us. If you're feeling generous, please go to forwardradio.org where you can send us a donation. No matter how large or small, it is deeply appreciated. Today, Doctors Mike Flynn and Gene Shively join me as co-hosts with their special guest. So let's jump right in. Dr. Flynn?
All right, this is Michael Flynn, a retired surgical oncologist from the University of Louisville. And let me begin with the usual disclaimer that any comments I make represent my personal views and do not represent the University of Louisville or the Department of Surgery. Gene?
This is Eugene Shively. I'm a retired rural surgeon in Campbellsville, Kentucky, and what I say does not reflect the Taylor Regional Hospital or Jane Todd Hospital in Greensburg or the University of Louisville Department of Surgery.
Well, our topic today is something that I confess I had very little awareness of before we got this program organized and tried to do some research so that I could have an intelligent conversation about this. It's screen addiction, and we have a special guest, Michael Eiden, who is a licensed social worker, and he was recommended as an expert a local expert in this topic by one of our previous guests. And he has a PhD in International Institute of Clinical Sexology and a master's from the Kent School at U of L. Dr. Eiden, thank you very much for coming on. We're looking forward to the conversation. We're going to give you an opportunity to make whatever comments you'd like to make for as long as you'd like to make them. And then the conversation will begin with Gene. I would ask you that most of our listeners are not technically experienced, I guess, or informed, so that if you could kind of try to keep your terminology in as layman terms as much as possible. So the floor is yours. We're looking forward to it.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thank you again so much for having me. Just to set a little context or share some about me. So I'm a therapist in private practice, and most of my career I worked in addiction treatment, focusing substance use disorder most specifically. And then I've been in private practice since about 2018. Since that time, I've been more focused on behavioral addictions like pornography, gaming, sex addiction, gambling, those sorts of things. And my focus has shifted also towards talking a lot about prevention. And that's not to say that everything that we'll talk about today isn't relevant to people across the lifespan. I can also talk about how screen addiction is a little more, some of the implications for older adults as well. But a lot of people who are digital natives, meaning they've grown up never not knowing about the internet, or maybe not having lived any period of time without kind of ubiquitous access to the internet through the use of smartphones, there's a lot of emerging research about the impact on the developing brain and how it affects us socially over our lifetimes if we become addicted to technology in a variety of different ways early on. So my experience with this, having spoken in front of a lot of groups of mental health professionals or schools, is that I think we will look back at this time in the way that we've looked back at different periods of time in relationship to smoking or seatbelts. That the amount of access that most people have to technology and some of the short form media that a lot of people are addicted to, in the future, we'll probably look back at this time and see that we made some pretty serious mistakes in terms of access. So my hope is, as a result of today, everybody walks away with something that might be helpful to them in exploring their personal relationship with technology or in parenting.
Jane?
Well, let's start off with just how do you define screen addiction, and tell us a little bit about what it is and how do we recognize it, not only in our own lives, but in our children's and grandchildren, and also in those of us who are senior citizens.
Yes. So in terms of a definition, it's helpful to think not so much in terms of how much screen time or how much time online someone spends, more so in terms of what is their relationship to the behavior, meaning people who are addicted to technology, the internet, smartphones, etc., are likely to experience some level of consequences as a result of their screen use, but they continue to get online despite those consequences. Those could be things like maybe my academic performance has dropped, or I'm not able to concentrate as well at work, or my spouse or my partner gives me a lot of critical feedback about, hey, you're spending all this time online and I don't get enough attention from you or presence from you. And I continue to use my technology despite those consequences. The kind of classic addiction criteria that we would use to diagnose things like alcohol use disorder or problem gambling also applies to screen addiction. So those would be things like tolerance, meaning I have to use more and more of the stimulus, like I got to spend longer online, or I got to start adding in some other behaviors, or I have to start including risk in the behavior to some degree, which might be, for someone who's addicted to pornography, they might start using porn while they're at work or while they're driving. For for a young person, it could be that I'm using my technology and watching videos and getting on social media while at school, to the point that I can't concentrate on my schoolwork and maybe get some discipline from the school as a result of that. But I have to continue to up the ante. Because the more sensitive we become to the stimulus, the less dopamine our brain receives as a result. So we got to pursue it more compulsively. Some other things would be that there's some evidence of withdrawal, that when I can't get online in the way that I'm accustomed to, there's probably going to be some irritability, some discomfort, increase in anxiety. For a lot of parents, what they may notice is that when it comes time for their children to give their devices up, or it's time to eat dinner together, or it's time to go to bed, maybe there's like kind of an age inappropriate emotional tantrum that happens in the exchange around setting limits with technology. Those would be evidence of things like there has been a buildup of tolerance and maybe a lack of ability to tolerate distress. Which is kind of a key indicator in my experience of working with a lot of people who have screen addictions, is that I have a difficult time being still without distraction and having to pay attention to what's going on in my body. If we think about an internet addiction, that means I'm probably kind of compulsively checking a series of different devices to keep myself really stimulated and really never having many opportunities to just experience discomfort in my body. The other thing I would mention quickly is just that there's going to be a level of preoccupation, meaning I'm constantly thinking about it even when I'm not doing it. That's sort of a hallmark of all addictions, is that it takes up the majority of my thought life. My life kind of orbits this particular behavior. And so anything that's going to get in the way of me pursuing the use of technology in the way that I prefer to use it, I'm probably going to start eliminating those things from my life and maybe not being so interested in hobbies or social relationships that I used to. So those would be some signs or symptoms that someone potentially has a screen addiction.
You mentioned dopamine in the research that I've done about this to try to have an intelligent conversation. They mentioned a thing called the dopamine effect. Can you explain that to us and our listeners again in kind of layman's terms so that we can appreciate what this is and what relationship it has to the screen addiction issue?
Sure. So dopamine is a neurochemical that's released in our brain, and it is associated with the feeling of both euphoria, like, wow, that feels really good, and also this intense sense that I need more of whatever it just was that felt so good. Dopamine is naturally released in a series of different naturally occurring behaviors, those being exercise, eating foods that we enjoy, having sex, and experiencing social connection. If we think about those four things, if we do those four things in balance, we're likely to survive longer and also more likely to procreate and pass on our genes to future generations. So all of our ancestors that did those four things in balance are the ones that made it, which means that dopamine is directly connected to our ability to survive as a species. So anything that produces a high amount of dopamine or an abnormal response to dopamine, like methamphetamine or like internet pornography or like scrolling through TikTok and seeing video after video, anytime we have an experience like that, our brain pays special attention to those moments and assigns what's called false evolutionary benefit, which is a fancy way of saying my brain interprets scrolling on TikTok as being essential to my survival. Therefore, I should do it more and more and eliminate anything that's going to get in the way of me doing it less. And so over time, the downside of this is anytime we kind of inundate our brain with a repetitive stimulus that gives us a lot of dopamine, our homeostatic response in our body is going to get activated. And so our brain slowly will pull some of those dopamine receptors off. So we're not going to get as much euphoria from the same behavior. So we're going to have to do it more and more and more trying to get the same effect. That really quick process I just went through is the basis of what's called tolerance, which applies to all addictions. How this kind of connects with more digitally based addictions specifically is that virtually every social media platform uses something called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, which is the same principle that slot machines and casinos use. It's you give out the reward at random. You might win the second time you hit the lever, and you might win the 42nd time, but it's totally at random, which is the way to elicit the strongest response from the participant. So social media being the way that it is, occasionally I'll get a bunch of likes on a post. Other times I won't get any notifications at all. My phone kind of summons me if I have my notifications turned on at random intervals. All of that is by design. So most of these apps, again, like TikTok or Instagram, are designed specifically to be as addictive as possible.
Now, do these platforms, do they keep a electronic record of what you like, and then they'll keep re-showing you or new videos, etc., on what you like? For example, if I look at a lot of YouTube videos on World War II, I'll start seeing more and more.
Yes. So most of these apps like YouTube or like TikTok or Instagram all use various forms of machine learning algorithms that are designed to glean all the information about the time you spend online, not only in terms of the things you might search, like World War II, but where physically you're located when you search things like that, and based on the other people you might follow on social media and what they like and are interested in, you may get certain things suggested to you. So yes, that's part of it. Another that I talk about often is like with YouTube, for example. YouTube's algorithm is specifically designed to show you increasingly extreme content. Because what we've learned over time is that what's most likely to keep people's attention the longest is more extreme content. And so if you start to look at something like a workout program, an at-home workout program for half an hour, if you look at enough of those, you may also start getting suggested videos for weight loss pills that you can take. And you might also start getting suggested videos of anabolic steroids and how you can use those. So the whole idea is that it's going to send you down a rabbit hole of progressively more extreme content because it's going to keep you online longer.
Now, basically, you're telling us that these social media apps are designed to be addictive. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Absolutely, they are. I mean, all of these apps hire teams and teams of psychologists specifically to be able to make the content as addictively as possible, or as addictive as possible.
Wow. Yeah. How do we deal with that, from a, I don't know, legislative or social way? That if this is as direct as that appears to be. I mean, this is a real serious issue.
It is, and I would go further in saying that there are some of us that are far more vulnerable and susceptible to the negative consequences of this than others, and that would specifically be folks who still have a developing brain, anyone younger than 26 or 27. In some countries have passed legislation or are doing more to hold tech companies accountable. I would point towards Australia in particular has set a ban on social media for anyone younger than 16. And so that is something that's within government's ability to do, is to set some age limits and restrictions for who has access to this content. The other would be collectively to, I'll just say, wield some power in pushing back on this idea that we have to be surveilled, meaning a lot of our private information is gleaned from some of these apps as we're using them, and also to reject the use of some apps, again, that are designed specifically to be addictive. So it does come back to kind of us as the users collectively to start to wield some power together.
Are there organizations, government organizations or otherwise, that have looked into the ethics of this and had just tell us a little bit about that and how it works?
Yes, so that there are some, I'll say some professional groups that I'm aware of that are more focused on advocacy and lobbying for more, for tech companies to have to behave a little more ethically, and also to set age limits and kind of put the onus back on them to prove to us that the material is safe to use. One in particular is a group called Health Professionals for Safer Screen Use. It's mostly based in the UK, but a lot of their advocacy has resulted in some of the changes that are happening at the governmental level in the UK when it comes to setting age bans and things like that. There's also another group called Wait Until 8th, which is a kind of a collection of mostly parents who've basically have a commitment to not give their children smartphones until they're at least in the 8th grade. Groups like that have started to kind of collectively push back against, again, some of these tech companies and also how some of this technology is used in schools.
Now, it's my understanding, and you've already referred to this, that the pre-adolescent and adolescent brains are more susceptible than the older brain. Now, can you enlarge upon that or explain that a little bit in more detail for our listeners?
Sure.
And me.
So, yeah, no problem. So the primary, couple primary differences between an adolescent brain and I'll say the brain of a 40 or a 50-year-old is that the adolescent brain is in a heightened state of neuroplasticity, meaning it's a heightened stage of development for the brain. It's more vulnerable to forming long-term patterns with addictive behavior. So being in a heightened state of neuroplasticity means we're a little more sensitive to some of the things happening in the environment. And the other thing that's kind of happening parallel to that is the limbic system that houses most of what's called the reward pathway matures much earlier than what's called the prefrontal cortex or the thinking brain. The prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain that enables us to do things like reasoning, like thinking about consequences, like deterring impulse, so I don't just jump at everything that could demand my attention. I can sort of focus my attention where I choose to, and also stay away from instant gratification. So the part of our brain that does all that stuff doesn't fully develop until later in our 20s, like somewhere between 26 and 28. So adolescents in particular are more impulsive and risk-taking by default, just because of the way their brain is wired at the moment. And so if they, that's why adolescents, it's typical, they might have more risky substance use, risky sex, those kinds of things. So they're primed to be able, basically they're ideal consumers from an addiction perspective because of those things. The other social component is that virtually every adolescent is really interested in autonomy and a sense of social belonging more than they ever have. They want to belong to the group. And so what's modeled to them in terms of how do I connect, and if maybe the primary way we connect is through social media, they're likely to get really hooked on that. And the other is to have a sense of their own personal world, like some place they can go that's their own, that's different from their parents and what their parents have control over. My experience has been working with families that a lot of adolescents will create this sense of autonomy online, where I have a gaming community, I have a community of people I'm connected to in social media, and maybe I'll be less interested in the old forms of autonomy, which would be like getting a driver's license in a car. That used to be the old kind of ticket to freedom. I have experienced that there's a pretty significant shift in that way with adolescents today, meaning they're going to pursue autonomy online.
So a 16-year-old might be more interested in being online than getting a driver's license and cruising?
Yeah, the short answer would be yes. Yeah, my experience.
Okay, that's extremely interesting. I would never even thought about that. Wow. How do you let me phrase it this way. What happens to an adolescent who's grown up in this atmosphere, and then when they get to adulthood, do they have increased incidence of psychiatric problems, social problems, etc.?
The short answer, according to the research I've read in my clinical practice, is yes, and similar in ways to other addictions. So, if an adolescent becomes addicted to alcohol or methamphetamine or opioids early on, they're more likely to have some comorbid issues later on, either in terms of their health or their mental health, or physical health or mental health. The common themes that I've noticed with adolescents that get addicted to technology early is they're much more likely to present like they have either ADHD or autism spectrum disorder. Part of that particular kind of overlap with those issues is that, as I just mentioned before, anybody who is addicted to technology is going to have their ability to use their executive functioning, that thinking brain I was talking about earlier. They're not going to be able to use that as well. They're not going to be able to organize themselves in space. They're not going to be able to focus on one thing at a time. And they're much more likely to be emotionally dysregulated, meaning that their ability to calm themselves down or to, notice a strong emotional reaction and not maybe have an outward reaction, all of those things are going to be compromised to some degree, which can very much look like ADHD. The other is that excessive screen use early on in someone's life causes atypical sensory processing, which means they may appear to miss things like social cues. At times they may appear to behave like they don't have as much empathy towards other people based on their actions, all of which sometimes can kind of masquerade like autism spectrum or ADHD.
Can these people who are addicted to technology, can they turn this around and make it useful? For example, go into a tech company and become a software engineer or be an IT person? Does that help them do that?
Um, I would say the answer to your first question, like, can they turn it around? Meaning, like, can they get better? Can they live a life free of being, compulsively using the internet? Sure, absolutely. Um, in terms of, can they translate their internet addiction into something that makes them money? Possibly. But my experience has been that most people who are addicted to the internet aren't addicted to making spreadsheets or building data analysis programs. They're addicted to things that are entertainment based. So they're typically not things that are going to be doing a lot to develop the brain or challenge the brain. It's more so to keep the brain numb and satiated. So I would challenge the thinking a little bit on the second part.
Now, are there mental health or personality issues that are more likely to be susceptible to screen addiction than other other personalities?
So the way I would frame it is that the people who are more susceptible to developing an internet addiction in some ways is similar to other addictions, in that if they experience a lot of adverse childhood experiences or a lot of early life trauma, aka they experience a lot of pain that's overwhelming to them emotionally, and they don't have other ways to get help and support or calm themselves or become soothed, they're much more likely to pursue something like an internet addiction to compulsively escape how much pain they're in. The other common thread that I've noticed is poverty. That if I grow up in poverty and let's say both of my parents are working a lot of hours just to make ends meet, the internet can be inexpensive childcare in some settings. And if I happen to live in a place that maybe isn't physically safe to go kind of run around outside and play in, there's not walkable green space or parks, etc., it may be safer to stay inside. And one way to kind of keep kids entertained is to have a screen in front of them. So poverty is definitely a risk factor as well. I wouldn't say so much that I've seen that there are specific personality traits that make someone more susceptible, but I would say in general, folks who are more impulsive, I mentioned this overlap with ADHD or autism spectrum. That's not to say that people can't have ADHD or autism and be screen addicted. They certainly can. My experience has been that folks that do have a real neurodevelopmental disorder like that are more susceptible to developing a screen addiction for sure than the average person.
Well, we as parents and grandparents, what do we do to prevent this type of addiction?
So a couple things that you can do. What I find works well for most is first to look at me, is to be willing to look at my own relationship with technology and how I might struggle with it or struggle with using it in balance. That's a better place to start the conversation with the young people in your life. Is, this is something that we're all in the mix of. Anybody that's carrying around a smartphone is 3 seconds away from really stimulating material at all times. And so if you can come from more of an authentic place of, hey, here's how I'm looking at my own use and trying to keep that in balance, and I'm concerned about yours, and let's talk about what that might look like. It's a good starting point because you can avoid that kind of finger wagging, I know best experience. And there's some kind of core prevention strategies that you can take with young people. A couple that I mention often are, I am of the belief, and based on the research I've seen, that it is best that a young person not have access to social media or a smartphone until they're 16. And as close to that number as you can get, the better. That's not to say that kids can't get phones sooner, but I'm an advocate of using, a dumb phone or basically a phone that doesn't have mobile internet access all the time. Because it's the ability to access the internet 24/7 that causes the majority of the addiction that I see with young people. So it'd be better that they have a device that doesn't have that access until their brain is more developed. Some other things that parents can do is make sure that they don't have devices in their children's bedrooms. So no TVs, no tablets, no phones in the bedrooms at night. That'll protect their ability to sleep. One of the most common consequences of a screen addiction is that there's a significant decrease in your sleep quality. Part of that is because anytime we use a device like a phone that emits blue light, that blue light hits our eyes and it suppresses melatonin production. Melatonin being the hormone that helps us to go into rest and sleep. So even if you're watching TV using a tablet or a phone late at night, it's going to diminish your ability to fall asleep. So those are all like basic prevention strategies. The last one I would mention is what the research suggests is the winning strategy for parents to prevent screen addiction is to have an open, ongoing dialogue with your children about everything that they experience online, all the apps that they use, the social media they use, the kinds of porn that they might be seeing, all of that stuff. Super important that there's open lines of communication about all of it. The second is that there's age-appropriate restrictions on how much access they get, and that is something that parents set in terms of a limit, like you get, an hour and a half of screen use per day, based on the age of the person. That's unchanging. And to not use this strategy of earned screen time. I've talked with a lot of parents who might use screen time as kind of a carrot on the end of a stick to say, hey, if you do well in school or, if you behave well at Thanksgiving, you're going to get an extra hour of screen time at home. It's a failed concept because it activates the addictive process. So don't use earned screen time. Those would be some prevention strategies.
What are your thoughts about cell phones in schools? You got some thoughts about the access? Because there's a lot of debate. I don't have any children that age, so I'm not into it as much as I would have been some years ago, but certainly there seems to be a lot of conversation about how that should be managed.
Yes, so I am a proponent of what's called a bell-to-bell ban, meaning kids don't have access to their phones from the starting bell of school until school's over. What a lot of schools might utilize to do that is kids either have to keep their phones in their locker or that there's these like lockable pouches that can be placed on the door of the classroom. There's some other countries have. Australia is the primary country that has instituted, like a strict bell-to-bell ban. So they're the ones producing the most data about this. There's been a lot of other strategies tried where they get their phones during breaks or they get it at lunch or there's specific times of the day they get their phones. What the research has shown pretty consistently is that bell-to-bell bans are most effective in creating a space for children actually to learn. Part of that is that there's a bunch of reasons. I'll just mention two. One is if kids are put in a position to use technology at school, what it means is that their brain has to find a way to use a device they associate with entertainment for very boring, non-stimulating tasks, which is extremely difficult. So I might be trying to use this Chromebook to work on math, but the whole time my brain is screaming at me with all these associations it has with YouTube and gaming and Roblox and whatever else. The second part is that we learn through the context of relationships. There's a significant amount of research coming out showing that it's not just the reception of information that I could get by watching a video or having an artificial intelligence bot teach me about something. We learn significantly through the milieu of social connection. And so kids miss out on doing that if they have their phones all day at school.
Well, you've mentioned Australia 2 or 3 times already in their ability to deal with this issue, certainly better than we have in this country. Can you give us some examples of, who or how, or why the Australians are so good at this or are doing a better job than a lot of other countries and certainly us?
It's there's a bunch of different angles we could take this conversation from, Michael. I'll just give you my personal spin is that there's a tremendous amount of money to be made by a lot of us staying addicted to our technology. And so anytime collectively we start to bump up against something like setting age restrictions or pushing back on these apps to prove that their content is safe for us, we start to bump up against essentially what is the largest commodity right now in our economic market, which is all of our attention. Right? There's no more land to colonize. There's no more, finite resources like oil to suck up out of the ground. What's left is the human attention. And so that's what's being competed for in the market. So countries like Australia have done tremendous work. There's other countries too, like Denmark, France, that are taking up the same, similar initiatives, and I think the UK will follow. So it's not that the information isn't out there. It's just it's going to take a kind of a collective groundswell of enough of us getting fed up to push back and be willing not to use some of this stuff in the meantime, I think.
It's interesting. Gene, just let me make one comment. I'll let you do it.
All right, no problem.
It's interesting. This is the same kind of stupid issues are going on in this country about guns and the access and the inability of the politicians and the legislatures in this country to have some sort of sensible approach to that. Sorry, Gene, go ahead.
Is there any data from Australia, or is it too early to determine if their policy is working?
No, there is data. Yeah, I could I could share it with you all after this. I'd be happy. I have a literature review basically of the because it's not only bell-to-bell bans. Other places have tried, again, some of these more middle-of-the-road interventions, and we have data about that as well. I'd be happy to share it with you all.
Well, just give for our listeners, if you could maybe give a couple of examples of something that they might be able to get access to, if they listen to the program and want to carry it a bit further.
Sure. So I'll just mention a couple places you can find the information. I have a pretty good collection of resources on my website, which is just eiden-integrative.com. Some other groups that do a great job at collecting and synthesizing this kind of research that I've talked about. One is a group called Children and Screens. So if you just go online and look up Children and Screens, they have a litany of podcasts. They also have, and this thing is massive, I think it's almost 600 pages of a PDF where they have reviewed a lot of this data that I've talked about, but they also have very specific suggestions for parents about how to navigate adjusting your child's screen use over their lifespan. Children and Screens is the name of that group. Can't recommend them enough. I would also point you towards the work of a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book called The Anxious Generation. And in it, he's talking about how basically in the early 2010s, we started to see this steep decline in adolescent mental health, unlike any other period in history. And the reason for that being that 2010 was about the time most people started carrying a smartphone in their pocket. He references quite a bit of this research that's coming out of Australia and other countries. Jonathan Haidt is a big proponent of bell-to-bell bans and not letting teenagers have smartphones or social media until they're 16. If you just look up his website, Jonathan Haidt, he also does a pretty good job collecting all the various research that's being done in different parts of the world and making it easy to find. So I would point you to them as well.
Now, let me ask you, you said there was an increase in mental health problems among teenagers and preteens starting in 2010. What type of mental health problems are these kids developing?
So the big themes that's showing up in the research, one is eating disorders. And
say that again?
A big one is eating disorders.
Oh, eating disorders, okay.
So specifically for a lot of young women who might use a lot of social media or become addicted to the internet, what they're likely to get inundated with is lots of imagery of other women who may have very perfect appearing bodies. And so this endless social comparison that they're constantly in has them assign too much value to their physical appearance. And over time that can develop into, some kind of restricting potentially with food or a fixation on being thin compulsively. Some other themes are with obsessive compulsive disorder. There's a researcher named Jason Nagata who is out of San Francisco. He is doing a lot looking at something called the ABCD study, which is the adolescent brain. I'm blanking on the C and the D, but basically I would encourage your listeners to check out the ABCD study. It's the largest study that's ever been done on adolescent mental health. And what they're finding is that there is a significant correlation between getting a smartphone early and having hours and hours above the norm of daily internet use that's associated with an increase in anxiety and depression, an increase in suicidality, an increase in eating disorders, an increase in obsessive compulsive disorder. And again, that there's going to be this overlap with what appears to be ADHD or some executive functioning impairment.
Does it help if you have a teenager to try to get them involved in other things like sports, band, acting, other organizations, scouts, etc.?
The short answer is yes. The more non-screen related activities that a young person is connected to, the better. And specifically, if they're things that will force them to not be able to use their technology and kind of be compulsively checking their phone, those can be really important protective factors for all of us, but specifically for young people. So yes.
All right, so let's in that same vein, if you see someone who you evaluate and identify that they have screen addiction, let's say a 14-year-old, how do you approach that from a treatment standpoint, and just kind of outline, the steps, getting them to do other things? How do you limit their phone access? Just how do you manage that thing, and what kind of expectations do you have depending upon whatever step you're taking? Do you understand the way I'm asking this?
Yes, yeah, I can give you a kind of a brief overview of what to do, what treatment would look like. Sure.
Yes, thank you.
So once we identify that there is really an addiction on board, if it's a 14-year-old, it's best to treat this as a family issue, not an individual issue. Meaning a 14-year-old cannot become addicted to the internet without the parents abdicating their responsibility to prevent their access to some degree. So my first task as a clinician in this way is I have to get the parents on board that this is a real problem and that their strategies up to this point of trying to prevent this from happening haven't been effective. And to some degree to take some responsibility for how this came to be, which is going to look like just owning that, maybe we didn't really know what to do, so we granted too much access, we made some mistakes, and now there's this addiction problem. It's much more appropriate for the whole family system to be involved in its correction, so to speak. So what that might look like is if someone is truly addicted, it's helpful that they have some period of initial abstinence, or what might be referred to as a digital detox early on, which is similar to other forms of behavioral addictions and treatment. We basically want to get the brain out of a compulsive state for a long enough time for them to integrate and get the benefits of some of the things like therapy, or like Eugene was talking about, getting involved in some non-screen related activities. All of that's going to be helpful and more beneficial if their brain is not in a compulsive state. So what that might look like is, depending on how long they've been addicted and what they've been using, maybe they take somewhere between a 3-week and a 6-week break from technology altogether, except for maybe being able to use the telephone to call people or stay connected to their friends. But during that period, they're not watching TV, they're not using their tablets, they're not gaming, they have no smartphone access. And the idea with that is that it's going to allow them to reset their sleep schedule. It'll give them a window of time to experience distress, experience emotional pain, and have to use some other coping strategies to deal with it. Hopefully, it's going to allow them to reconnect with the other people around them differently, because chances are when we get really addicted to something, we tend to isolate. And it's going to give them time to become motivated to start to pursue some of these other non-screen related activities again, which could be their hobbies, their work, school, etc. After that, like let's say after they have 3 to 6 weeks of abstinence from technology, you're going to slowly bring it back in. The goal is not to be screen-free forever. That's really not realistic in our modern world. So what that might look like is, hey, At the beginning, you're going to get 30 minutes today to use your phone to text or call your friends. And then you're going to give the phone back, and we're going to try that again tomorrow. And we'll slowly bring back screen use in over time until we kind of reach that limit of how much screen use can you tolerate without using it to the point where you experience a lot of craving. Maybe you get really intense and angry when it's time to give it up. We're going to be looking to make sure those things aren't happening again. I wanted to mention this quickly. On my website and several others, you can find specific recommendations for how long and how much and what kind of screen use is appropriate for young people as they age. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry has a great website where they offer like kind of a screen time plan. And on my website, I have basically a synthesis of what most of the folks doing academic research about this have suggested. There's also a group called Operation Parent, which is a parenting nonprofit that has a lot of free content, and they have some good suggestions on there as well.
Now, how easy, that seems to me that would be a difficult process for the parents to be limiting access or denying access to a 14-year-old for whatever, 4, 5, 6 weeks. So in your experience, I mean, so the question is, how does that work? I mean, is that going to be an easy thing to do? Are there, I'm assuming that the kid can go out and sneak somebody else's phone and do some other things. So it sounds like there's a lot of issues there that are not just, it's easier to say it than to do it. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very difficult. What I tell parents the abstinence period of this is more difficult for the parents than it is for the young person that's addicted. Because the parents are going to have to be the one who kind of shoulder the anger and irritability and distress and the increased depressive symptoms that kids are going to have because they're going to be in really intense withdrawal for a while. So what I would encourage people who consider doing this is make sure the parents have a lot of their own emotional support through the process because it's going to be tough. It's also helpful if everybody in the family system participates to some degree, meaning all of us are going to be working on our relationship with technology during this phase. So for families, I suggest that they take the TVs off the walls, that they don't have computers and tablets laying out, and that for the most part, when we're home together, most of us are not on our technology in support of the person who's trying to do this. What typically happens is when we put our technology down, we do what comes natural. We start to connect with each other. And in many ways, that may have been what was missing all along to some degree. So it is, to your point, it is very difficult. The biggest barrier most of the time is school. Schools are so tech dependent that it's almost impossible for them to go paper completely. So a lot of times it does require some advocacy, both from the parents and if there's a professional involved or their physician, it helps to write a letter to the school requesting that they support with letting them go tech free for a little bit if possible.
Okay, let's take the same issue. Instead of a 14-year-old, let's do, an adult, a 25-year-old or 30-year-old who has screen addiction. So how do you manage that? This is not somebody living with their parents, whether they're married or single or have a relationship, but I'm assuming they recognize that this is an issue and come to see you for advice as opposed to a 14-year-old who's brought in by their parents.
Yeah, what I would say, Michael, is that the majority of people I see that are adults that have some kind of a screen addiction are coming at the protest of someone they love. Somebody in their life has said, I've had enough, you either get in therapy or I'm out. And it's usually their spouse. That's not to say that a single person who lives alone can't have an internet addiction and get better. It's just very rare that that person shows up to treatment because most of us are motivated to change because of our consequences. So, but to answer your question, it's going to be really challenging for that person. What they're likely going to have to do is they're going to have to get some support in the way of accountability from other people, meaning a child has the support of the parents kind of keeping the limits. If I'm living on my own, what that might look like is I may have to entrust my Apple password on my phone so that I can't download any new apps that I use addictively. And I may have to use a dumb phone for a period of time that doesn't have internet access. And I might have to ask someone to hold on to all my devices for a month while I engage this abstinence period. So they're going to have to really get creative about getting some additional support, and likely may need more group level support, meaning like 12-step fellowships. There are several different 12-step fellowships specifically for screen and internet addictions. One in particular is called Internet and Technology Addicts Anonymous, or ITAA. There is a meeting in Frankfort, Kentucky, and there's a lot of meetings that meet virtually, somewhat ironically.
Are you treating people online?
Meaning, like, do I see some people virtually?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I want to bring up another topic. Do senior citizens get addicted? I'm still doing some home visits for a company, and I see a lot of people who sit at home, watch TV. They live alone. They don't have much social contact. They don't go to church anymore. Do these people are you seeing people like that who get addicted online?
Yes. So in that situation, Eugene, that you described is the one that I see most commonly. It's that, for a lot of senior citizens, it might be more common to live alone. And if I'm not as socially connected, whether to family, friends, or loved ones, or social groups, what seems to be more the tendency that I've noticed is the TV may stay on all day long, and there's a lot of like multi-screen use, meaning I'm watching TV, but I also have my tablet or my phone out, and I'm sort of endlessly scrolling or online shopping. And so it's that kind of, we haven't really talked about this much, but this idea of scrolling, or you all may have heard the term doom scrolling, which just means I kind of scroll and scroll endlessly and unconsciously. When we scroll like this, when I flip my finger on my phone looking at Facebook, the reason it's addictive is because of something called rhythmic novelty seeking, which is a fancy way of saying my brain is hunting for new information. And so when we scroll like that, over time, you're not really paying attention so much to the information as much as I'm interested in the scroll. 30 years ago, the best kind of scrolling we had was flipping through the TV channels, right? Jerry Seinfeld had that great line about people don't want to know what's on TV. They want to know what else is on TV. And so the same applies to things like scrolling. So what I see with a lot of older adults is, there's a lot of isolation. And that in a way of maybe dealing with some of the loneliness I feel, I compulsively use technology. The downside, of course, is that it increases the isolation, right? The more I do that, the less likely I am to connect with others.
All right, let's look at this from a little different perspective. And I'm not sure how comfortable you are talking about it in this way, but let's see where it goes. This is a mental health issue. And one of the issues that we have with this country is a lot of people don't have insurance or coverage for their health care issues, whether it's a physical issue like diabetes or a mental health issue like this. How can you give us an idea how people are covered for this in terms of their health insurance? Because I'm assuming this is a health issue. Now, I don't know. I guess a lot of it depends on the type of health insurance you've got and what it covers. But just looking at it from your perspective, you obviously know a lot more about that aspect of it than I do.
Yeah. So a couple things I would say is, right now, there is not a relevant diagnosis that a practitioner like me or a physician could use to diagnose someone with a screen addiction. There are two diagnoses. One is called internet gaming disorder, which is specific to online gaming. And there's another one called compulsive sexual behavior disorder, which is more specific to things like porn addiction. Those two things are likely to be in the next version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the book that practitioners like me use to diagnose mental health disorders. But it's unknown when that's going to happen. All that to say, if we can't render a diagnosis, an insurance company is not going to provide any reimbursement for treatment. So what that means is right now there is a very, very limited amount of treatment facilities and/or practitioners that focus on this area, because it's understudied, and at the moment you can't get insurance reimbursement. So a lot of folks will have to pursue someone who maybe is you have to pay out of pocket in order to see them, because they're treating for a diagnosis that insurance won't reimburse for, and that's the situation that I'm in. So a lot of folks at this particular moment, if you have someone who you know is addicted, but you don't have the resources to maybe go work with a professional like me who's got training in this in particular, your best bet is to get connected to some of these communities and to check out some books. One book I would suggest in particular is it's called Reset Your Child's Brain, which was written by a physician named Victoria Dunkley. That's a really good book if you have a child that's kind of middle school or younger and you're worried about this and you'd like some tips. She's done a great job with that. So the short answer to your question, Michael, is people are really up against it. And yeah, if you're living in poverty, unfortunately, you and your children are more likely to have internet-related addictions, and you're also, again, likely to have less access to help.
Okay, one more thing. We're getting close to the end here. We've got about 3 minutes left. I want to ask you one more question in the same vein. As you know, this program is sponsored by Kentuckians for Single-Payer Health Care, promoting Medicare for all. And this may not be a fair question if you're not comfortable addressing it. I totally understand. But if we had some sort of national health insurance in this country, like most other first world developed countries have, I'm assuming that there would be coverage for this mental health issue. And I'd just like to hear your thoughts about this before we sign out.
Yeah, let me say unequivocally, I 100% support Medicare for all. It's a travesty that we're the only industrialized country that doesn't have medicine situated like that, and basically leave people in a situation to die in the street if they don't have the right coverage, which is a tragedy. So the short answer is yeah, if we don't have medicine privatized in the way that we do, and we offer people health care that they need, that it'll be easier to treat for sure.
Well, listen, Michael, thank you very much. This has been an excellent program. I have learned an enormous amount about this.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming on, and there are a lot of parents out there that are going to love to hear this. Thank you, Dr. Flynn, Dr. Shavely, and Dr. Eiden for creating today's show. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Join us the next time for Single Payer Radio. Have a wonderful rest of your day.